Right, well, thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. Here I am. It's Magnus Nielsen, Lord Londonstone, back in the heart of London, and I'm continuing with this series of videos that I'm doing on the Palace of Westminster, the Houses of Parliament, and the history of Parliament. And I've just taken a little break, but I've returned to Trafalgar Square. The only reason for doing that is because this is the location for a statue that I want to talk about. I think I've already mentioned it in passing, but I want to talk about it in greater detail. And that is the statue of King James, oh rats, I can't get it into the frame, King James II. I'll have to try again, don't worry, please be patient. So, we'll make another attempt a bit later on, but I just wanted to talk about the affairs. I took the story up to the end of the period of Oliver Cromwell and the arrival, the restoration of the monarchy under King Charles II in 1660. And I just wanted to carry on from there. And before I do that, I have to talk about the religious problems that were taking place in England at the time. Now, we had the Reformation of the Church in 1535 under Henry VIII, and from that time on there was a problem with relation to whether we were going to return to the Church of Rome or not, and that sort of continued for several generations. The Pope, Martin V, in 1585 pronounced the Bill of Excommunication against Queen Elizabeth I. In other words, what he said was that it was lawful for any Catholic in England to murder Queen Elizabeth I and to restore a Catholic dynasty to the throne. So that was not really very helpful to those people in England who wanted simply to worship according to the old religion. It made it very difficult for them because they're all then immediately under suspicion of treason. Now, going back to the 16th, 17th century, all this religious stuff was terribly important. It's not so much important today. We don't really bother about it too much in those days, but in those days it was very serious, and so this sometimes still gives people the heebie-jeebies. And if that's the case, ladies and gentlemen, this is a trigger warning for you. If you do get upset about these issues, then you want to turn off and go and watch another video. But I'll carry on. So thank you very much indeed for those of you who are still with me. I want to talk a bit about the situation, about the reign of King Charles II, and then take matters forward from there. So we had Charles II and his younger brother, James, the Duke of York. They were both sons of King Charles I, and they were both brought up as Protestants in the Church of England, although their mother, Catherine, their mother was Catholic. She was Henrietta Maria. She was French. Now, Charles had several sons, but not by his Queen Catherine of Braganza, which made it difficult because he had no heir. His next person in line for the throne would have been Charles the Duke of York, had Charles died. James the Duke of York would have had his own children. He married a lady called Anne Hyde, who was a Protestant, and then as a Protestant he brought up two daughters. They were Mary and Anne, and then he suddenly converted to Catholicism around about the year 1670. And that did create a problem because it now meant that the heir to the throne was a Roman Catholic, and that did not make him very popular with the people of the country, people of England. Way back in 1678, there was the exposure of the Popish plot. Actually, that was a hoax which had been generated by a man called Titus Oates to expose the possibility of a plot against the life of King Charles II. It all turned out to be total nonsense, but there were a number of eminent Catholics in the country at the time who were implicated in that and then sentenced to hang at Tyburn. The whole idea of having a Catholic king was highly unpopular with most English people at the time, even if they weren't Puritan. So, in 1681 we had the Exclusion Crisis, and that was a situation when the Earl of Shaftesbury put a bill to Parliament to exclude James, the Duke of York, as the heir, and to put onto the throne, the next heir would have been the Duke of Monmouth, who was one of the natural sons of Charles II by a woman, I think her name was Lucy Walton. But the upshot of all this was that Charles actually stepped in and dissolved Parliament before the bill could go through. So the situation as it then stood was that James, the Duke of York, would be the heir to King Charles II on his death. And you had two sorts of people now in Parliament. As I said before, pointed out St Stephen's Chapel. They'd been meeting in the Chapter House before that. They moved into St Stephen's Chapel. It was a completely different arrangement. In the Chapter House, everybody could sit round in a circle. But in St Stephen's Chapel, you had different people sitting in what used to be the old choir stalls, so they were opposite each other. Now, if you supported the government, you tended to sit in the choir stalls, which are on the right-hand side of the speaker, and you called yourself the court party. If you were wanting to promote the Duke of York as the successor to King Charles II, you were formed part of the county party, and you were country party, and you were actually over on the left-hand side of the speaker. So you had the two parties that actually involved in Parliament, and that was really to be the way that it was going to be for the next 150 years or so. Actually, Charles died in 1685, and he did actually convert to Catholicism. He did it on his deathbed, which was prudent of him, really, when you take matters into consideration. Now, what I'm doing, I'm trying to get into my picture here, the statue of King James II, because he came to the throne in 1685. It didn't last very long. I think what I will do is just turn this thing round so you can actually more clearly. There we are. That is King James II. King James II. He was King James II of England, King James VII of Scotland. He was famous for being king when we had the rebellion of the Duke of Monmouth. He set up a rebellion against his uncle, and he was badly defeated at a place called Sedgemoor, and he was sentenced to be beheaded on Tower Hill. There was a big backlash also from Judge Jeffreys, who worked for the suppression of the supporters of the Duke of Monmouth. 350 of them were enslaved and sent off to Barbados, where their descendants still lived. He really managed to alienate everyone. He created what he called the Declaration of Indulgence, which he ordered to be read out from every pulpit in church on a Sunday. And there were 7 bishops who refused to help with this, and then they were put on trial for seditious libel. And the trial took place in Westminster Hall, because that's where all important trials used to take place in those days, and they were acquitted. In 1688, Mary of Modena, who was the second wife of King James II, she gave birth to a son called James. And that meant, the implications were that you would now have a next king on the throne would be a Catholic, and you would have Catholic monarchs sort of extending into the future. And most people were wholly against that idea, and they rose up, and somebody went off to Holland to appeal to William, who was the stadtholder of Holland, and urged him to come and invade the country, which he did. He came and landed in a place called Tor Bay in Devon on the 5th of November 1688, and then started marching towards London. James II dithered a bit, but he fled the country on the 13th of December, and that's when William took over as king. So we still had Parliament, and still, as I say, we had the House of Commons was divided into two parties, and over the period of time, over the next 150 years or so, the members of the Court Party, so the members of the Country Party, they called them the Whigs, and the members of the Country Party called the members of the Court Party the Tories, and these names were taken from the Irish politics of the time. The Tories were the dispossessed Irish Catholic landowners who had turned to banditry and brigandry, and the Whigs were the Presbyterians who had been imported into Ireland from Scotland. They weren't actually used as anything other than pejorative names. But anyway, that is how we had the Whigs and the Tories set themselves up towards the end of the 17th century and into the 18th. And that situation continued right up until about the 1830s. By that time we had Reformed Parliament. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is just briefly the story. And this is a statue of James II. I'm sorry, as I say, I've had to return to Trafalgar Square, go back and forth all the time. It's just not as if all the monuments I want to talk about, and I can't illustrate this because they're not sort of set out in a neat straight line. They're all higgledy-piggledy all over the place. So this is the situation I'm talking about. This was the statue of King James II, and it now stands outside the National Gallery in Trafalgar Square. And before I leave this video, I'm just going to pan round to give you an idea. And say part of the idea of doing these videos is that you can see for yourself what London looks like in August 2025, just to give you an idea. So there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. This is Trafalgar Square, and I shall move on from here, and I shall start winding up, and I will talk about I'll talk about the situation after the flight of King James II. So I'll say over and out for now, and I will see you all in the next video.